She only wanted to sell flowers, until the mafia boss said, "I want the flowers and you." The alarm was a betrayal, slicing through the thin gray light of 4:30 in the morning. For a moment, Elena Marquez lay still, listening to the groan of the building's ancient boiler. The cold seeped through her threadbare blanket, a familiar ache in her bones. Sleep was a luxury, survival was a rhythm. She rose, pulling on layers, 2 shirts, worn jeans, and thick wool socks before moving to the small kitchenette. The water sputtered from the tap, running rust-brown for a moment before clearing. While the kettle shrieked, she looked at the stack of envelopes on her small table. Pale red. Final notice. The weight of her mother's illness lingered long after she was gone, a debt that felt less like money and more like a brand on her skin. Elena ignored it. She packed her lunch, a hard-boiled egg and an apple, and filled a large thermos with strong, cheap black tea. By 5:15, she was maneuvering the heavy wooden cart out of her building's damp storage locker. The wheels squeaked. Loud in the pre-dawn silence of the industrial district, Bellhurst was a city of steel and shadows, and her corner, at 5th and Union, was in the heart of its grimiest quadrant. Warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, their breath a constant plume of steam from ventilation shafts. The air smelled of diesel exhaust in the nearby tanneries. And then, Elena opened her buckets, the scent of freesia, eucalyptus, and damp earth unfurled into the smog. It was her small rebellion. She arranged the bunches with practiced, gentle hands, white lilies for hope, deep red roses for a passion this street never saw, and simple, bright carnations for endurance. She was a ghost on this corner. Elena Marquez, in her mid-20s, possessed a quiet beauty that she deliberately muted. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, the color of old whiskey, were always downcast. She was kind, offering a strained but genuine smile when someone bought a flower, but she was deeply private. She kept her head down, avoiding the lingering stares of the factory workers, the sharp gaze of the beat cops. Attention was danger. Attention was trouble. Her only anchor in this concrete ocean was Mrs. Patel. At 6:01, the metal shutter of the newsstand next to her corner rattled open. Mrs. Patel, a tiny woman wrapped in a vibrant saffron-colored shawl, emerged, balancing a small tray. "Chai, Elena," she said, her voice a comforting rasp. "You are too thin. The wind will take you." "Good morning, Mrs. Patel." Elena smiled, accepting the steaming paper cup. The spicy, sweet warmth was the best part of her day. "And you are too kind. You will spoil me." "Bah, someone must—" They settled into their shared silence. A comfortable alliance. Mrs. Patel sold bad news printed in black ink. Elena sold fragile beauty that would be dead in a week. They watched each other's stands during bathroom breaks, 2 small islands of dignity in a sea of urban decay. The day passed in a blur of small transactions, a construction worker buying a single rose for his wife, apologizing for overtime, a young secretary crying, buying lilies for a funeral. Elena was a confessor who never spoke, just nodded and provided the required petals. The trouble started late. The afternoon light had turned metallic and cold, the 5 o'clock rush thinning to a trickle. A black sport utility vehicle, so clean it looked wet, turned onto Union. It did not slow, it did not signal. It simply pulled to the curb, tires kissing the pavement, parking illegally and with absolute indifference. It idled for a full minute, its tinted windows reflecting the street's grime. Mrs. Patel, sensing the shift in the air, began organizing her magazines, her movements suddenly brisk. "Go home, dear," she murmured, not looking up. "It is late." But Elena was frozen, watching the passenger door open. A man stepped out. He was not large in the way of a bouncer. He was dense, wearing a suit that cost more than Elena made in 6 months. Another followed from the back, then a third. They moved with a predatory stillness, scanning the street, the rooftops, the alleyways. Then the rear driver's side door opened. The man who emerged was tall, and where his men were broad, he was precise. He wore a tailored dark wool coat that fell to his knees, impeccable. without a single speck of the city's dirt on it. His hair was jet black, cut sharp. He did not look at his surroundings. He assumed his surroundings were already looking at him. He was Lucien Renzari. Elena knew the name. Everyone in Belhurst knew the name. It was whispered in bars and cursed in precincts. The Renzari Syndicate, they owned the ports, the unions, and, it was said, half the city council. He was a myth, a monster, and he was walking toward her flower cart. His men stayed by the vehicle, but their focus was entirely on him and on her. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to look away, to dip her head in her usual show of deference, but she could not. He stopped directly in front of the cart. He smelled faintly of expensive leather and something cold, like winter air. He was, she realized with a jolt, younger than the legends suggested, perhaps in his mid-30s. His face was sharp, angular, with a shadow of stubble along a hard jaw, but it was his eyes that held her. They were a pale, Arctic gray, and they were looking at her as if she were a puzzle he was calmly dismantling. He gestured vaguely at the buckets. How much? His voice was low, a soft gravel that cut straight through the traffic noise. For which ones, sir? Elena stammered, hating the tremor in her voice. All of them. She blinked. Sir, that's everything. Yes. He did not raise his voice. He did not seem impatient. He simply waited. Elena's mind raced, calculating. That would be... It's nearly $400. Lucien Renzari reached inside his coat. He did not pull out a wallet. He pulled out a slim, silver money clip holding a thick fold of bills. He slid one bill from the clip, a 100, then another and another and another and a fifth. He held the $500 out to her. It was crisp, clean. That is too much, she said, her hands remaining at her sides. I cannot make change for that. I'm not asking for change. His gray eyes drifted from her face, down her neck, to the worn collar of her coat, and back up. I am buying the flowers. Slowly, her hand trembling, she took the money. The paper felt electric. His fingers did not touch hers. Thank you, she whispered, starting to wrap the bunches in paper. It will take me a moment to bundle them for you. Keep the flowers, he said. Elena froze, the paper crinkling in her grip. I don't understand. He took a half step closer. The air between them suddenly felt thin, charged. He was so close now she could see the fine texture of his dark coat, the way the light caught the silver in his watch. I want the flowers, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate and terrifying. And you? Elena's breath caught. A cold dread, sharper than the wind, washed over her. Then, confusion. She looked at him, really looked at him. This was not a flirtation, it was a statement of fact. She tried a nervous laugh, a brittle sound that shattered in the air. Sir, I think you are mistaken. His expression did not change. There was no humor in his eyes, no smile on his lips. There was only a profound, chilling certainty. He held her gaze for 3 long seconds. It felt like an eternity. He was not joking. Lucien, one of his men called from the car, his voice respectful but urgent. Lucien Renzari did not look away from her. He simply gave a short, sharp nod, an acknowledgement. He took one last look at her, a look that cataloged her, memorized her, and then he turned. He walked back to the SUV, his coat settling around him perfectly. His men fell in around him, closing the doors with heavy, solid thuds. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into traffic, and was gone. Elena stood there, her hands shaking, the $500 clutched in her fist. My dear, Mrs., Patel said, suddenly at her elbow, her face pale. You must pack up. You must go home. Now. Elena brushed it off. She had to. It was a mistake, a rich man's cruel joke, a power play. It meant nothing. She packed her cart, the flowers, his flowers suddenly feeling like evidence. She refused to believe she would ever see him again. But he returned the next day. Same time, same vehicle. This time, he bought a single white rose and paid with another $100 bill, refusing the change. He said nothing. He just watched her. And the next day, a spray of lilies, another 100. His visits became a fixture of her afternoons. He never stayed long, just long enough to buy a flower, to let his gaze rest on her, to remind her that he had not forgotten. Elena tried to set boundaries. She started pre-wrapping a flower when she saw his car approach. She would hold it out, along with the change she had meticulously saved from his previous purchase. "Your change, sir," she would say, her voice firm. He would ignore the money, taking only the flower, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest, coldest second. "Keep it." Her corner no longer felt safe. It felt like a stage. Then his presence grew. She started seeing new men on her street. They were not in suits. They were rougher, dressed like dock workers or truckers, but they had the same stillness as the men in suits. They leaned against lampposts, smoking, watching. One evening, as she pushed her cart home, 2 of them fell into step behind her, keeping a block's distance. When she reached her apartment building, they waited until she was safely inside before they turned and walked away. He was having her followed. He called it safety. She called it a cage. The inevitable confrontation happened on a Tuesday, a week after his first appearance. It was dark, the rain turning to a sleazy, wet snow. Elena was exhausted, her shortcut through the alley near her apartment a calculated risk she took too often. She heard the footsteps behind her, uneven and heavy. "Hey," a voice slurred. "Hey, pretty lady, what you got in the cart? Got something for me?" Elena's heart leaped into her throat. She gripped the cart handle, pushing faster. The smell of cheap whiskey hit her. A large man, reeking and unsteady, blocked her path. "Just let me pass," Elena said, her voice shaking. "I don't have any money. I don't want money," he sneered, lunging, grabbing her arm. His grip was brutal, fingers digging into her bicep. Elena cried out, a sound of pure panic, pulling back, her feet slipping on the wet cobblestones. It happened faster than she could process. 2 shadows detached themselves from the mouth of the alley. They were on the drunk man in an instant. There was no negotiation. One man grabbed the drunk's arms, pinning them behind his back with a practiced, violent twist. The second man struck him, a short, hard jab to the stomach that made the man fold with a wet gasp. Elena scrambled back, pressing herself against the brick wall, her breath coming in sobs. And then, Lucien Renzari appeared at the end of the alley, framed by the streetlight. He was not in his fine coat. He was in a dark sweater and trousers, as if he had been interrupted. He walked toward them, his steps measured, but the fury rolling off him was a physical thing, a drop in temperature. He did not look at Elena. He stopped in front of the drunk, who was now weeping, held immobile by the 2 men. "You put your hands on her," Lucien said. It was not a question. The man sobbed. "I didn't mean... I was just..." Lucien's fist moved. It was not a wild swing. It was a precise, brutal motion. The sound was sickening, a wet crack of bone. The man's head snapped to the side. He was unconscious before his knees hit the ground, his jaw clearly, horrifically broken. Lucien Renzari looked at his own knuckles, then wiped a drop of blood on the drunk's soiled shirt. He finally turned his gaze to Elena. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face, clutching the flower cart. He walked over to her. He did not touch her. He just looked at the red marks on her arm where the man had grabbed her. His eyes, those pale gray eyes, became impossibly dark. "I will walk you home," he said. The walk from the alley to her apartment door was silent, but it was the loudest silence Elena had ever known. He was furious. She could feel it, but it was not the hot, explosive anger of the drunk. This was a cold, structural rage. He was angry at the alley. He was angry at the flickering halogen light in the stairwell. He was angry at the peeling paint on her apartment door. He seemed, she realized, personally insulted that she lived this way. At her door. She fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking. He took them from her, his fingers brushing hers, and unlocked the door. Pushing it open, he stood on her threshold, a dark, imposing figure too large and too dangerous for her small, clean space. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. He just nodded. She was shaken, terrified by the violence she had just witnessed. but deep beneath the fear was a strange, unwelcome pulse of comfort. He had protected her. The intensity that frightened her was the same intensity that had just saved her. "Would you?" she heard herself say. The automatic script of hospitality. "Like some coffee?" His eyes scanned the tiny room, the single bed, the small table, the neatly stacked books. "No," he said. He looked back at her, at the tear tracks on her cheeks, the faint bruise already forming on her arm. He seemed to be fighting an internal battle. "Yes," he said, changing his mind. "I will have a coffee." He stepped inside. The room shrank. Elena moved to the kitchenette, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. The air simmered. He did not sit. He stood by her small, cracked window, looking down at the street where his men were now dragging the drunk's body out of the alley. She handed him the mug. Their fingers brushed. This time, it was not cold. It was hot. A sudden, sharp spark of contact. He did not drink. He just watched her over the rim of the mug. He watched her wrap her arms around herself. He watched her try to control her trembling. His gaze was so intense, so focused. It felt like a physical touch. Her pulse raced, a frantic bird in her throat. This was more intimate than any kiss, this silent, total consumption. He set the mug down on her counter, the ceramic clicking loudly in the quiet. He walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the knob, his back to her. "You will not be walking home alone again," he said. And then he was gone. Elena locked the deadbolt and leaned against the door, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. She closed her eyes, her body finally succumbing to the tremors. She was breathless, not from fear, but from the impossible. Suffocating weight of his presence. Outside. Lucian Renzari got into the back seat of the black SUV. His bodyguard, a man named Sal, sat in the driver's seat, not speaking. Lucian adjusted the cuff of his sweater, his knuckles aching slightly. "Get a car on this block, around the clock," Lucian said, his voice quiet. "I want eyes on that door." "Sir," Sal said carefully, "the watch team is already in place." Lucian looked up at her window, a small, dim square of light in the decaying brick facade. He thought of her in that tiny room, smelling of soap and fear, with the bruise on her arm. "She's not for watching anymore," Lucian said, his voice hardening. "She's mine now." The aftermath of the attack in the alley settled over Elena's life like a fine layer of dust. Everything looked the same, but it felt different, heavier. Lucian Renzari's presence was no longer a brief, intrusive event. It was a fact, a black sedan, different from the sport utility vehicle but bearing the same aura of silent menace, was now permanently parked at the end of her block. When she pushed her cart to her corner in the pre-dawn gray, the car's engine would start, its headlights cutting through the mist. It followed at a distance. It waited. When she packed up, it escorted her home. His men were ghosts, but she felt their eyes. The local delinquents who used to lounge on the corner now gave her a wide berth. Even the beat cop, Officer Riley, who used to pester her for a free flower, now just nodded curtly and moved on. Lucian himself visited more frequently. The $100 bills for a single rose stopped. The transactions became more personal and more unsettling. He arrived not just with flowers, but with gifts. He brought her a box of orchids, deep purple and spotted, so exotic they looked almost dangerous sitting on her simple cart. He brought chocolates from a confectionery in the city's wealthy upper district, wrapped in gold foil and tasting of dark coffee and salt. He never pushed. He never demanded. He would ask her, "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." "The wind is cold today. You should have a better coat." "I am fine." He would nod, his gray eyes lingering on her, and then he would leave. The large tips he pressed into her cash box feeling less like payment and more like an investment. "Mrs." Patel watched with growing concern. "He is a wolf. Elena," she warned one morning, stirring sugar into their shared tea. "He brings you pretty things, but he is still a wolf. He has not hurt me. Mrs. Patel." "He hurt the man in the alley," she countered softly. "He's just deciding if you are prey or a pet. Be careful." Elena was careful, but her caution was warring with a new, insidious feeling. The crushing weight of her mother's medical debt still woke her at night, but the men who used to knock on her door, the ones from predatory lending agencies, had stopped coming. The silence outside her apartment, once threatening, now felt watchful, secure. She hated herself for the relief it brought, the illusion of control shattered on a Wednesday. The morning was bright, the air crisp, business was good. Elena was humming softly as she wrapped a bunch of carnations when a man in a rumpled gray suit approached. He was not a customer. He had the tired, sour expression of a city functionary. He consulted a clipboard. "Elena Marquez?" "Yes." "You run this stand?" "Yes, I do." "Is there a problem?" He tapped his pen on the clipboard. "Your vendor's permit. It's been revoked. Effective immediately." Elena's blood turned to ice. "What? That's impossible. I paid my fees for the quarter. I have the receipt." "Does not matter." The man sighed, clearly bored. "We got new orders from the zoning commission this morning. This corner is no longer zoned for retail. You are in violation. You need to pack it up." "In violation? I have been here for 3 years. Mrs. Patel has been here for 20. The new stand is different. It is a permanent structure. This," he gestured dismissively at her cart, "is not. You have until the end of the day. If you're here tomorrow, we confiscate the cart and issue a fine of $500. $500. The words choked her. But why? Who issued the order? The man? Mr. Davies finally looked at her, his eyes cold and unsympathetic. "New orders. That is all I know. That is all you need to know." He handed her a slip of paper and walked away. Elena stared at it. Notice of revocation. She knew exactly what this was. This was Bellhurst. This was corruption. Someone with money wanted her corner, or someone with power wanted her gone. She had no recourse. She could not afford a lawyer. She could not fight the city. This cart was her entire life. It was the only thing standing between her and the envelopes on her table. She did not cry. She was too numb, too frightened. She began to pack her flowers back into the buckets. At 5:10 in the afternoon, Lucien's SUV pulled up. He stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his dark suit, his gaze immediately landing on the half-empty cart and the stacked, empty buckets. His expression, usually so placid, tightened. He walked over. He did not ask what was wrong. He demanded, "What is this?" Elena did not look up, her hands scrubbing angrily at a bucket. "What does it look like? I am packing. I am closing." "Why?" "My permit was revoked," she said, her voice brittle. "New orders. The city just kicked me out." Lucien was silent for a full minute. Elena could feel his stillness. It was the same stillness he had shown in the alley, the calm before the violence. "Who told you this?" "An inspector, a man named Davies. It does not matter. It is done." Lucien took out his phone. He dialed a number. He did not say hello. He said, "Zoning." He listened. His eyes fixed on Elena. She could hear the tinny, panicked sound of the voice on the other end. "I do not care what the file says," Lucien said, his voice soft, but lethally sharp. "The flower stand on 5th and Union. The permit was revoked this morning by a man named Davies." He listened again. "No, you are mistaken. He overstepped. He made a clerical error. You will fix it, and you will issue a new permit, valid for 5 years. It will be delivered to her, here, by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Am I clear?" He hung up without waiting for a reply. He put the phone back in his pocket. "Unpack your flowers," he said. Elena stared at him, her hands frozen. The sheer, naked arrogance of it took her breath away. "Just like that, you just make a call." "Yes." "Who are you to command the city?" "I am the man who keeps it running," he said simply. "Unpack." A hot, bitter anger rose in her. It was not just about the permit. It was about the powerlessness. It was about him stepping in, a dark god moving chess pieces, while she was left to tremble. "No," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I will not," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I did not ask you to fix this. I did not ask for your help." "You were wronged," he said, as if that explained everything. "And you fixing it makes it right? You just made me. You made me your property. That is what this is it not? You think you own this corner? You think you own me?" He took a step closer, crowding her space, forcing her to look up at him. "Yes," he said, "I do." She recoiled as if struck. "I protect what is mine," Lucien said, his voice dropping, the coldness in it burning her. "Whether it asks for it or not, you are in trouble. I stopped it. That is all." He turned and walked back to his car. The next morning, at 8:45, a sweating, pale mister, Davies arrived. He was holding a laminated piece of paper. "Miss Marquez, my deepest apologies. A terrible clerical error. Completely our fault." He thrust the new permit at her. "As you can see, this one is valid for 5 years. All fees waived. Again, my apologies." He fled before she could say a word. That night, Elena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She should have been relieved. She was not. She was terrified. Mrs. Patel's words echoed in her head. A wolf. But the fear was different now. After the alley, she'd been afraid of him. Now, she realized she was afraid of how much she wanted this. She was afraid of the feeling of safety his suffocating control gave her. It was a poison, this reliance, and she was drinking it in. She was no longer afraid of Lucien. She was afraid of herself. She was afraid of wanting to be safe in his world. The next evening, she was cleaning her apartment, scrubbing the floors as if she could scrub away her confusion, when a knock came at her door. It was not the knock of his men. It was too precise. She opened it. Lucien stood there. He was not in his suit or his fine coat. He was dressed in dark trousers and a simple black cashmere sweater. In one hand, he held a large, fragrant paper bag. In the other, a bouquet of stargazer lilies, their white and pink petals spotted, their scent overwhelming. "I brought dinner," he said. She was too stunned to speak. He took her silence as invitation, stepping past her into the tiny, clean room. He set the bag on her small table and looked for a vase. I only have a glass," Elena stammered, pointing to a tall drinking glass. He nodded, filled it with water, and arranged the lilies. His large, rough-looking hands surprisingly gentle. The flowers transformed the room, making it feel both smaller and richer. He unpacked the bag. It was not takeout. It was from Anello's, the restaurant his family owned in the old district, a place Elena had only ever walked past. There were containers of veal piccata, lemon-scented asparagus, and fresh pasta. He had brought a bottle of deep red wine and 2 actual wine glasses. He had even brought real, heavy silverware and linen napkins. He had planned this. "Sit," he said. They ate at her wobbly card table, the silence thick and awkward. The food was the best she had ever tasted. "Why lilies?" she finally asked, needing to break the silence. He stopped, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at the flowers, his expression softening in a way she had never seen. "They were my sister's favorite." Elena blinked. "You have a sister?" "I had one," he said, his voice dropping, losing its hard edge. "Her name was Sophia. She died when she was 16. The sudden vulnerability in his tone disarmed her. "Lucien, I am so sorry." He swirled the wine in his glass, staring into the dark red liquid. It was not part of the life. It was random. Stupid. He looked up, his gray eyes shadowed. "She went to a bodega on our block to buy milk. A junkie came in to rob the place. He panicked, shot the owner, shot her." He paused, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "She bled out on a dirty floor. All for a gallon of milk and $40 from the register. I was 20. I was already in this world. I had men. I had power, and I could not stop a 2-bit thief from killing her." Elena's heart ached. She saw him then, not as the monster, not as the mafia boss, but as a 20-year-old boy who had lost his sister. She saw the root of his obsession with control, his hatred of chaos, his fury at the world's random cruelty, without thinking, driven by her own deep-seated grief for her mother. Elena reached across the small table. She laid her hand over his. Lucien froze. His entire body went rigid. He stared at her hand on his, as if it were a burning coal. He had touched her, grabbed her keys, brushed her hand, but this was the first time she had initiated contact. Seconds passed, then, slowly, as if pulling against a great weight, he turned his hand over. He did not just take her hand, he engulfed it. His palm was warm, his skin rougher than she expected. He laced his fingers through hers, his grip firm, protective. The air in the room changed. The tension did not disappear, but it coiled, becoming something else, something thick and heavy and charged. He held her gaze. He stood, bringing her hand with him, gently pulling her to her feet. The table was no longer between them. He walked around it, not letting go of her hand until he was standing directly in front of her. He was so tall, she had to tilt her head back. He lifted his free hand, the one that had broken a man's jaw, the one that had held a phone and commanded a city. He touched her face. His touch was not a caress. It was a discovery. His thumb brushed the line of her jaw, rough and warm. "Elena," he whispered. Her name was a raw sound in his throat. Her breath caught. She should have been afraid. She should have pulled away. She did not. Her eyes fluttered closed as he leaned in. The kiss was not what she had expected. It was not the bruising, possessive assault she had feared. It was tender. It was hesitant. It was almost gentle. His lips were soft, firm, tasting of red wine and something uniquely him. He kissed her slowly, a long, searching pressure that asked rather than took. It was a kiss of profound, restrained hunger. Elena's hand, the one not trapped in his, rose and gripped his sweater. She felt her body, of its own accord, lean into his, her lips parted slightly under his. His response was immediate. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She felt the solid, unyielding wall of his chest, the heat of his body. The kiss deepened, the angle changing, his mouth moving over hers with a new, controlled intensity. Her pulse hammered in her throat, in her ears, a wild, frantic bird. She was melting. She was terrified. She was wanting. And just as she felt herself teetering on the edge of surrender, he stopped. He pulled back, only an inch. His forehead rested against hers. His breathing was heavy. His eyes were closed. She could feel the tremor in the hand he still had pressed against her jaw. "Not until you want it, too," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "Not until you are sure." Elena stared at him, lips parted, her mind a riot of fear and longing. She was not sure of anything, least of all herself. Lucien stepped back, releasing her. The cold air of the apartment rushed into the space where he had been. He looked at her one last time, his gray eyes turbulent. Then he bent, took her hand, the one he had been holding, and pressed a chaste, warm kiss to her knuckles. He gathered the empty containers, the wine bottle, the glasses. He left the lilies. He was gone. The next morning, Elena woke before her alarm. She dressed, her lips still feeling the phantom pressure of his. She felt confused, exposed, and achingly alive. She walked to her corner, pushing her old squeaking cart, dreading the sight of his men. She turned onto 5th and Union and stopped dead. Her old, battered cart was gone. In its place stood a new one. It was not a cart. It was a stall. It was crafted from dark, polished mahogany, with bright, gleaming brass fittings. A deep green canvas awning extended from the top, promising shade and protection from the rain. It was beautiful, sturdy, and looked impossibly expensive. On the side, embossed in elegant gold script that caught the morning light, was a small, brass sign. Elena's Garden, Mrs. Patel was already at her newsstand, sweeping the sidewalk. She did not look at Elena. She looked at the cart. It arrived an hour ago. "Mrs." Patel said, her voice heavy. 2 men. They were not carpenters. Elena. They were the men in the suits. Elena stepped forward and touched the smooth, polished wood. It was a gift. It was a comfort. It was a cage. The new cart changed everything. Elena's Garden became a fixture on 5th and Union. The polished mahogany and brass sign acted as a beacon in the industrial gray. Business, which had been steady, now flourished. Customers who had once bought single, wilting carnations now bought full bouquets. The new awning protected them from the sun and the frequent Bellhurst drizzle. Elena had to hire a delivery service twice a week just to restock her exotic inventory. The orchids, the stargazer lilies, the Dutch tulips. But the cart was not the only change, the protection. Once a shadow, I was now a spotlight. Elena Marquez was no longer the quiet, invisible flower girl. She was, as the whispers in the street confirmed, the mafia boss's girl. She heard it from the delivery boys who dropped off her flowers, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Special order for Miss Marquez. Mr. Renzari's account. She heard it from the factory workers who bought roses. Gotta keep the boss's girl happy, huh? They would chuckle nervously. She even felt it from Mrs. Patel, who still shared her morning tea but whose eyes were now laced with a deep, abiding sadness. Mrs. Patel no longer warned her about the wolf. She just watched Elena, as if she were already lost. The label chafed. Elena had spent her entire life building a wall of anonymity, finding dignity in her independence. Now, her success felt unearned. It was not hers, it was his. The beautiful cart was not a gift, it was a brand, marking her as his property. She resented the assumption. She resented the whispers, and, in a dark, secret part of her heart, she resented him for making her life easier, for making her need him. Her independence, the last thing she truly owned, was dissolving. She had to get it back. She began by refusing his gifts. When a delivery of expensive chocolates arrived at her apartment, she sent them back. When his driver, Sal, appeared at the end of the day to escort her home, she waved him off, pushing her cart the 10 blocks, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The sedan followed, slowly, but it did not stop her. For a week, she maintained the distance. She worked. She went home. She ignored the silent, watchful presence of his men. On Friday, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she knew who it was. She had never received a call from him before. Elena. His voice was low, a rumble through the speaker. "I have not seen you. I have been busy," she said, and her voice tight. A pause. "I will come by your apartment tonight, 8. "No," she said. The word was small, but it was out. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "No," he repeated, not in confusion, but in disbelief. "I am tired. Lucien, I do not want company." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was flat, cold. "I see, I will not come." He hung up. Elena stared at the phone, her hand shaking. She had done it. She had drawn a line. A wave of relief washed over her, followed by a sudden, sickening dread. That night, she barely slept. She listened to every creak in the hallway, every siren in the distance, but no one came. When she arrived at her corner the next morning, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It was destroyed. It was not robbery. It was violation. The deep green awning was slashed to ribbons, hanging in wet, limp strips. The polished mahogany was gouged and splintered, as if taken to with a crowbar. Her buckets were overturned. The exotic flowers she had so carefully curated stomped into the filthy pavement. A muddy, fragrant pulp of ruined petals and broken stems. But the worst part, the part that made her knees weak, was the sign. The elegant gold-embossed brass plate reading Elena's Garden had been defaced, scratched deep into the metal. Crude and violent was a single, ugly word. Horror! Elena stood there, numb, as the city woke up around her. She did not cry. She was beyond tears. This was the cost. This was the world he lived in, and this was its message. The rain began to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that plastered her hair to her face and turned the ruined flowers into soup. She did not move for an hour. She just stood, staring at the wreckage of her life. She did not call him. She would not. This was his fault, his protection, his ownership, his world. This was the result. The storm broke in the late afternoon. By 8 o'clock, the drizzle had turned into a full, driving, horizontal rain. Elena was still in her apartment, sitting in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, when the knock came. It was not a knock. It was a pounding, a furious, desperate sound that rattled the door in its frame. She did not move. "Elena!" His voice, muffled by the door and the storm, was a roar. "Elena, open this door. I know you're in there." She squeezed her eyes shut. "Damn it, Elena, open the door or I will break it down." She believed him. Slowly, stiffly, she unwrapped herself from the blanket and padded to the door. Unlocking the deadbolt, he burst in, not walking but surging. He was soaked. The rain ran from his black hair in rivers, dripping from his jaw. His expensive wool coat was saturated, clinging to his broad shoulders. He looked wild, his Arctic gray eyes burning with a terrifying, white-hot fury. He stopped, his chest heaving, and stared at her. "Sal called me," he bit out, his voice raw. "He said the cart was destroyed. He said you never showed up. I have been... Why did you not call me? Were you hurt? Did they touch you?" He reached for her, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders. She recoiled, slapping his hands away. "Do not touch me!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her raw throat. "Do not!" The accusation, the sheer venom in her voice, stopped him cold. "This is your fault," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All of it. Your fault. My fault," his anger was incredulous. "That some animals. They are your animals, Lucienne, or they are the animals who hunt you. It does not matter. Before you, I was invisible. I was poor. I was struggling, but I was invisible. No one saw me. No one cared. Now," she laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Now I am the mafia boss's girl. Now I am a target. Your protection." She spat the word. "Your protection is a spotlight, and I am the one caught in it. You did this to me." She was sobbing now, hitting his chest with her closed fists, her blows landing with dull, wet thuds against his soaked coat. "You are controlling. You are poison. You ruin everything you touch. I hate you. I hate what you did." He grabbed her wrists, stopping her. His grip was steel. His face was a mask of cold, hard rage. He was breathing as hard as she was. "You think this is control?" he snapped, his voice dangerously low. "You think this is a game?" He pulled her, dragging her to the window, forcing her to look down at the dark, rain-swept street, at the alley where she was attacked. "Look at it. Elena, look at the world you live in. It is not kind. It is not safe. It wants to eat you alive." He spun her around, his hands gripping her shoulders, his face inches from hers. The fury in his eyes was gone, replaced by a desperate, agonizing truth. "I am not the one trying to hurt you," he said, his voice cracking. "I am the only thing keeping it at bay." His words hit her harder than any physical blow. The fight drained out of her, leaving a void. He was right, he was a monster, but he was her monster. He was the wall standing between her and the true darkness. She broke. A sob tore from her, a sound of such profound loss and terror that it seemed to hollow her out. Her knees gave way. He caught her, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his cold, wet body as she wept. He did not say anything. He just held her, his hand tangling in her hair, pressing her face into his shoulder. She clung to him, her fingers gripping the wet wool of his coat, the storm outside matching the one inside her. "I'm so scared," she whispered into his chest. "I know," he murmured, his voice rough. "I have you. I have you." He tilted her face up, his eyes dark with rain and a desperate, possessive tenderness, scanned her features as if memorizing them. He kissed her. It was not the tender, hesitant kiss from her apartment. This was a claiming. It was rough, wet, and desperate. It tasted of rain and anger and a hunger that had been held back for too long. It was not a question. It was an answer. And she kissed him back. She met his passion with her own desperation, her fear transmuting into a different kind of fire. Her hands moved from his coat to his neck, her fingers digging into his skin, pulling him closer. He groaned, a low sound deep in his chest. He broke the kiss only to capture her mouth again, deeper this time, a passionate, overwhelming claiming. The world narrowed to this. The cold, the rain, the ruined cart, it all dissolved, leaving only the heat of his mouth and the solid, unyielding strength of his body. He lifted her, one arm sweeping under her knees, the other supporting her back, and carried her from the door. He did not carry her to the couch. He carried her to the bedroom. He set her down gently on the edge of her small bed. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street, casting long shadows. The sound of the rain against the glass was a frantic drumbeat. He knelt in front of her. He was still soaked, dripping onto her floor. He did not move to undress her, or himself. He just looked at her, his gaze intense, possessive, and, she realized, deeply vulnerable. He looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that made sense. Slowly, he reached up and touched the collar of her shirt. "Elena?" he breathed. It was all the permission he needed. She did not know who moved first. Her hands went to the buttons of his coat, clumsy and shaking. He shrugged it off, letting it fall to the floor in a heavy, wet heap. His own hands, rough and calloused, cupped her face. He kissed her again, but this time, the fire was banked. It was slow, emotional. He undressed her with a reverence that made her heart ache. He unbuttoned her shirt, his fingers brushing her skin, and his breath hitched when he saw the faint, silvery scar that ran along her collarbone, a relic from a past she never spoke of. He lowered his head. He did not kiss her mouth. He kissed the scar. He pressed his lips to the damaged skin, a soft, warm, healing pressure. He whispered reassurances against her shoulder, words she could not quite understand, but she felt their meaning. "You are safe. I see you. You are mine." He saw all of her. The fear, the trauma, the stubborn pride, the parts of her that were broken, and he did not turn away. She let him. For the first time in her life, she let the armor fall away completely. He was gentle, but his intensity was a tangible thing, a current running through them both. His touch was both a promise and a demand. Every brush of his hand, every kiss he traced along her skin was deliberate, worshipful. He moved slowly, protecting her, teaching her body a new language, one of safety and passion intertwined. She clung to him, her body arching toward his, meeting his intensity with a desperate, silent need. The rain lashed against the window, a soundtrack to the slow, emotional claiming, until the only world that existed was the space between his hands and her skin, his mouth and hers, the heat and the desperation and the profound, terrifying safety of his arms. Afterward, he did not leave. He pulled the thin blanket over both of them and gathered her against his chest. His skin was warm, his heartbeat a steady, powerful rhythm beneath her ear. He held her as she slept, his arm a heavy, possessive bar across her waist, his face buried in her hair, for one night in the heart of the storm. Elena felt completely and utterly safe. But at dawn, she woke to the sound of a distant siren. The rain had stopped. The space beside her in the bed was empty. He was gone. The only sign he had been there was his coat, still in a heap on her floor, and the faint masculine scent of him on her pillows. She lay there, feeling the cold air on her skin. When her phone buzzed on the nightstand, it was a text message from an unknown number. It was not from Lucien. It contained only 7 words. "You're his weakness now." Tick, tick. Later that day, he found her. She was not at her corner. She was sitting on a bench by the river, watching the gray water slide by. He sat beside her, leaving a foot of space between them. He was back in his suit, the boss, the mask firmly in place, but his eyes, when they looked at her, were raw. "It was the Morettis," he said, his voice flat. "Morettis? A rival family. They have been quiet for years. Now, they are moving on my territory. They have been watching you. The men who destroyed your cart, they were Moretti soldiers. They were sending me a message. That I am your weakness," she said. It was not a question. His jaw tightened. "Yes." He looked at her, his heart tearing. "Elena, I can get you out. A new name, a new life, anywhere you want to go. Somewhere warm, somewhere safe." He was offering her an escape, the life she thought she always wanted. Elena turned and looked at him. She saw the power, the danger, and the agony in his eyes. He was offering her safety, but he was the only safety she wanted. She'd been a ghost, hiding from the world. He had seen her. "I'm not going to run," she said, her voice quiet but steel. "I will not be some pretty, fragile thing you lock away in a penthouse to keep safe." He stared at her, seeing the unbroken woman beneath the scars. He nodded slowly, a terrible, final acceptance. "Then I will bring war to your doorstep to keep you safe," he said. The vow Lucien Renzari made on the banks of the river was sealed in steel and glass. Elena's small, crumbling apartment became a memory. Her new life was in his penthouse, a sterile, silent fortress that floated above Belhurst. Looking down on the city through 3-story-tall windows, he had not asked. He had stated, "You will stay with me. You are not safe there." And so, she was here. The security was absolute, suffocating. She woke up in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, to the knowledge that 2 of his men were stationed in the private hall outside her door. She was never alone. If she went to the kitchen for water, a man in a dark suit, Sal, his most trusted bodyguard, would nod from the far end of the living area. If she stepped onto the vast terrace to feel the wind, she could see, on the rooftop of the adjacent building, the unmistakable silhouette of a man with binoculars. "It is temporary," Lucien insisted, his voice tight. He had been spending late nights in his study, the door closed, his voice a low, angry rumble on the phone, until the Moretti problem is handled. This frustrated her. She was a bird in a gilded cage, but the cage was beautiful, and the bars were made of his obsessive concern. She had no cart to push, no rent to fear. Her days were empty, a vacuum she filled by exploring his world. She learned about his empire not from his words, but from the fragments she pieced together. She learned it from the way men in expensive suits, men who looked like they belonged on stock exchange floors, would arrive at the penthouse and speak to Lucien with a deference that bordered on fear. They did not talk of drugs or gambling. They talked of port schedules and controlling the longshoremen's union. They discussed city zoning votes and leveraging the sanitation contract. Lucien Renzari did not just run a crew of thugs. He ran Belhurst. He controlled the veins of the city, the steel and concrete, the labor that built it and the trucks that cleared its trash. It was a power that was vast, intricate, and utterly terrifying. A part of her, the part that remembered the sneer of the city official who had revoked her permit, was also darkly fascinated. He did not break the law so much as he rewrote it. He was the gravity that held the city's underworld and much of its upper world in orbit. They began to live like a couple. A strange, damaged, isolated couple, existing in the eye of a hurricane. The nights were theirs. They ate dinners he had catered, sharing charged glances over wine, the unspoken war with the Morettis hanging between them. But in the quiet hours, she would find him in his study, the weight of his world pressing down on him. She would come up behind him and place her hands on his shoulders, kneading the steel-like tension there until he finally leaned back, pulling her into his lap. One night, he came home well after midnight. He found her in the kitchen, picking at a piece of dry toast. He looked at her, then at the toast, and his expression soured. "This is what you are eating?" he rumbled. "I was not hungry." He sighed. Tossing his suit jacket over a chair, he rolled up the sleeves of his pristine white shirt. "No," he said. He walked into the cavernous stainless steel kitchen, a place she had only ever used for making tea. He opened the refrigerator, stared into it, then the pantry. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, completely out of his element. "I will cook," he announced, as if declaring a tactical maneuver. Elena leaned against the marble island, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "You cook?" He shot her a dark look. "I eat." He pulled out a box of pasta, a head of garlic, olive oil, and some dried chilies. He was clumsy. He searched for 10 minutes to find the right pan. He peeled the garlic with a brutish intensity, crushing the cloves with the flat of a knife so hard they skittered across the counter. When he dropped the pasta into the boiling water, it splashed onto his expensive shirt, and he swore, a low, vicious curse in Italian. "Having trouble, boss?" Elena teased, her voice light. He looked up, scowling. his hair falling over his forehead. He looked less like a mafia king and more like a frustrated young man. The scowl faded, replaced by a rare, almost invisible smirk. "Do not distract the artist," he rumbled. He finished the aglio e olio, simple and fragrant, and slid a large portion onto a plate. Then he seemed to realize he had only made one. He looked at the plate, then at her. Without a word, he grabbed 2 forks and set the pan directly on the marble counter between them. They ate standing up, sharing the pan, their shoulders occasionally brushing. The pasta was simple, spicy, and perfect. It was the most normal, the most real they had ever been. That fragile domesticity continued. A few nights later, the tension in the penthouse was thick enough to cut. He had been on the phone for hours, his voice sharp. The Morettis were pressing, testing his borders. He was pacing the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights, a king surveying a kingdom under siege. Elena felt the chasm between them, the world of violence she could not enter. Soft jazz was playing from hidden speakers, a low, mournful saxophone. She needed to reach him, to pull him back from the edge. She slipped off her shoes, letting them fall silently onto the thick Persian rug. She walked over to him. He did not turn. She touched his arm. "Lucien?" He grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes still on the city. She took the whiskey glass from his hand and set it on a table. Then she took his hand. He looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you doing, Elena?" "Dance with me," she whispered. "I am not in the mood for... Please." She did not wait for an answer. She tugged on his hand, stepping closer, and placed his large, rough hand on her waist. She put her own hand on his shoulder, lacing the fingers of her other hand with his. "Elena, this is foolish," he said, his body rigid. "Just follow my lead." She began to move, a simple, slow shuffle, barefoot on the cold marble. He was impossibly stiff, a statue of resistant muscle, but she did not stop. She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart. She closed her eyes, letting the music guide them. Slowly, second by second, the tension bled out of him. His hand on her waist tightened, pulling her closer. His other hand held hers, his thumb tracing small circles on her skin. He began to move with her, his steps sure and steady. He was no longer fighting her. He was holding her. "I have not danced," she confessed, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Since my mother died, we used to dance in our kitchen, to an old radio." She felt his chest rise and fall in a deep, unsteady breath. He bent his head, resting his cheek on the top of her hair, his arms enveloping her completely. They swayed in the dark, high above the city, 2 lost souls clinging to each other in a rare, fragile moment of peace. The peace shattered. A phone rang. It was not his personal cell. It was the secure line on his desk, a harsh, jarring sound that sliced through the music. Lucien's entire body went rigid. The man holding her was gone, replaced instantly by the boss. He released her and crossed to the desk in 3 long strides. "Yes." Elena watched him, her heart sinking. His face, which had been soft and unguarded, turned to ice. "Where?" he snapped. He listened, his back a rigid wall of muscle. "How many? Is he—" He paused. "Keep him alive. I am coming." He slammed the phone down. The rage coming off him was a physical force, a drop in temperature, a promise of violence. "What is it?" Elena asked, already dreading the answer. "Dante." The name was gravel. Dante. His second in command, his consigliere, the man who was his oldest and only friend. Ambushed, in the old district, the Morettis. He was moving, grabbing his keys, shrugging on a dark jacket he pulled from a closet. He went to a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a sleek, black handgun, checked the clip, and slid it into the waistband at the small of his back. Elena ran to him, her blood cold with terror. She grabbed his arm. "Lucien, stop. Please, this is what they want. They are baiting you. They want you to react. Please, do not go." He looked at her. His eyes were not his. They were the Arctic gray eyes of the man she first saw at her cart. The eyes of the man who had broken another's jaw in an alley, they were flat, cold, and utterly void of the man who had just danced with her. He gripped her arms, his fingers digging in, and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was hard, bruising, and final. It was a brand. "I cannot protect you with kindness, Elena," he said, his voice a low snarl. "They touched my family. They will learn why that was a mistake." He tore his arms from her grasp, turned, and was gone. The penthouse door shut with a heavy, final click. She was left alone in the vast, silent room, the mournful jazz still playing. The wait was the purest form of torture. She paced the length of the living room, from the windows overlooking the city to the cold, empty kitchen, and back again. She made coffee she could not drink. She watched the clock. Midnight, 2 a.m, 4. The city lights began to fade, giving way to the sickly gray light of dawn. The penthouse, her gilded cage, had never felt more like a prison. She was terrified for him, but she was also terrified of him, of the man who would return. The front door opened. Elena spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. He stumbled in. He was not the immaculate boss. He was a wreck. His dark suit was torn at the shoulder. His white shirt was ripped open at the collar and stained with dirt and dark, coppery patches of blood. A long, deep-cut weeping blood was carved over his left eyebrow. His knuckles were raw, split and bloody. He looked like he had walked through hell, and he had, in his exhaustion, brought some of it back with him. "Lucien," she breathed, rushing to him. "I am fine," he slurred, waving her off, but he leaned heavily against the wall, his whole body shaking. He slumped onto one of the pristine white sofas, leaving a smear of grime and blood. She did not listen. She ran to the master bathroom, grabbing the heavy-duty first aid kit he kept under the sink, a bowl of warm water, and clean towels. She knelt on the floor in front of him. He was staring at his hands, his breathing ragged. She said nothing. She dipped a cloth in the water and gently, carefully began to clean the gash on his forehead. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but did not pull away. She worked in silence, her hands steady. She cleaned the drying blood from his face, her touch light. When she was done, she took his hands. They were a mess. She began to clean his split knuckles, dabbing at the raw flesh with antiseptic. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were haunted. "He might lose the arm," he whispered. His voice was hollow, broken. Elena paused, her hand still holding his. "Dante," he choked out. They set a trap. They knew I would come. He's in surgery. Because of me. Because I was not fast enough." He closed his eyes. A single tear escaped, tracking a clean path through the blood and grime on his cheek. "I brought this war to us," he whispered, his voice cracking open. "And I cannot," he shuddered. "I cannot lose you, Elena." He opened his eyes, and she saw him, not the boss, not the monster, just a man, terrified and broken. "I cannot lose you, too." Her heart broke. She saw it all. He was not just fighting the Morettis. He was fighting the ghost of his sister, the memory of her bleeding out on a dirty floor. He was fighting his own suffocating fear that he would fail again, that he would be the man who could not protect the people he loved. She leaned forward, her movements slow, tender. She gently kissed the tear track on his cheek. She kissed his bruised eyelid, his temple, and finally, his mouth. It was a soft, healing kiss. "You are not going to lose me," she whispered against his lips. She took his bandaged hand and pressed a soft kiss to his raw, wounded knuckles with deliberate, loving care. She began to unbutton his ruined, blood-stained shirt. He watched her, his breath catching, his haunted eyes never leaving her face. This was not the frantic, desperate passion of the storm. This was something deeper, a different kind of desperation. It was a need to affirm life, to erase the death and violence he had just waded through. It was a need to hold on to the only thing in his world that was not part of the war. She pulled him to his feet, guiding his exhausted body. She led him to the bedroom and slowly, Gently. She undressed him, her hands worshiping him, healing him. They fell into the bed, a desperate, silent communion, a clinging of two souls in the wreckage, seeking to reaffirm that they were, in fact, still alive. Elena woke first. The sun was high and bright, streaming into the room. Lucien was still asleep beside her, a deep, heavy sleep of pure exhaustion. In the light, he looked younger. The harsh lines of his face softened, the vulnerability of the night still clinging to him. She slipped out of bed, pulling on his black silk robe, the scent of him enveloping her. She padded into the vast, silent living room. The television was on, muted, as it always was, tuned to a 24-hour news channel. A stern-faced anchor was speaking. Curious. Elena picked up the remote and turned up the volume. Federal sources confirmed this morning that after a night of unprecedented, gang-related violence in the Port District, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has opened an official, high-priority investigation. Elena froze, her hand still on the remote. The target of this new federal task force, the anchor continued, is alleged Bellhurst businessman Lucien Renzari and his organization, the Renzari Syndicate. A photo of Lucien flashed onto the screen. It was not a candid. It was a sharp, professional headshot, the one that ran in business journals. He looked cold, powerful, and untouchable. Elena stared at the screen, the sound of the anchor's voice fading. The walls of the penthouse, her fortress, her gilded cage, suddenly felt like they were closing in. The first time they came for her, they were polite. Two agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man and a woman, did not knock on the penthouse door. They were simply let in by Sal, who looked paler than usual. They sat on Lucien's expensive white sofa, a stain on the pristine, sterile environment. The woman, Agent DeRosa, was sharp, with kind eyes that did not match the predatory set of her mouth. The man, Agent Harris, just looked bored and angry. "Miss Marquez," DeRosa began, declining the water Sal offered. "We are investigating the activities of Mr. Lucien Renzari. We have questions about the night of the incident at the port." Elena sat opposite them, her hands clenched in her lap. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. "I do not know anything about that." "Is that so?" Harris cut in, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Because we have reports of a significant escalation of violence. Mr. Renzari's consigliere, Dante Alighieri, was ambushed. And then, hours later, a warehouse registered to a Moretti holding company was dismantled, violently. We believe," DeRosa said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that Mr. Renzari retaliated. We believe he was there. We believe you know he was there." Elena thought of him returning, covered in blood and bruises. She thought of nursing his wounds. She thought of the desperate, broken look in his eyes. "He was here," Elena said, the lie tasting like ash. "All night. He was with me." Harris let out a short, humorless laugh. "All night? Funny, his car was tracked driving at 90 miles an hour toward the Port District at 2:15 in the morning." "His car was stolen," Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. "It was returned later." "Miss Marquez," DeRosa said, dropping the kind facade. Her eyes went flat. "You are a smart woman. You came from nothing. You were selling flowers on a street corner, drowning in debt. Now you live in a glass tower. Do you really think this ends well for you? He is a criminal. The Morettis are not his only problem. We are his problem. And by lying to us, you are making yourself an accessory after the fact. That is a federal crime. You will go to prison, Elena." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. "I'm telling you the truth," Elena whispered. "He was here." DeRosa stood, adjusting the blazer of her suit. "Think about your future. This man's world is burning. You do not have to burn with him. Cooperate, and we can protect you. Lie, and you will be just another piece of collateral damage." They left. As soon as the door clicked shut, Elena's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her entire body shaking with a stress so profound it felt like a sickness. When Lucien found her like that an hour later, his face, already tense, hardened into a mask of cold fury. He did not ask what they said, he knew. He pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle but his grip unbreakable. "I'm getting you out of the city," he said. It was not a request. "No. Elena, this is not a discussion. I have a jet waiting, a house in Costa Rica. It is safe. No one will ever find you. Sal will go with you." "No!" she shouted, pulling away from him. "I am not running. I told you. I am not some fragile thing you can lock away. This is not about locking you away," he roared, his control finally snapping. The fear beneath his anger was raw, exposed. "This is about keeping you alive. Do you not understand what is happening? The feds are at my door. The Morettis are at my throat. They know you are my weakness. They are hunting you. And if I run, they win," she cried, tears of frustration in her eyes. "They will have taken me from you. That is what they want." He grabbed her, his hands tangling in her hair, his forehead pressing against hers. He looked at her with a desperate, agonizing intensity. "Listen to me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I can lose the ports. I can lose the unions. I can lose the money. I do not care. It is all just things." He pulled back, his gray eyes burning into hers. "But if anything happens to you, Elena, if they touch you, I burn everything to the ground, the feds, the Morettis, this whole damn city. I will tear it all apart. There will be nothing left. Do you understand me?" She stared at him, breathless, seeing the terrifying, absolute truth in his eyes. He meant it. "I am not leaving you," she whispered. For 3 days, the penthouse was a tomb. Elena paced the floor-to-ceiling windows, a prisoner in her glass tower, watching the city live on without her. Lucien was gone, lost in meetings with his lawyers, with Dante, with his captains. He was preparing for war. She felt like she was suffocating. The air was too clean, the silence too heavy. She needed to breathe, to feel the pavement under her feet, to remember the woman she was before all this. "I'm going out," she announced to Sal, who was stationed by the door. Sal, his face impassive, shook his head. The boss gave clear orders. "Miss Marquez, you are to remain in the building." "I'm not asking for permission," she said, her voice hard. "I am going insane in here. I am going for a drive. You can come with me. You can bring the whole army, but I am going." Sal hesitated, his duty warring with the steel in her voice. He finally nodded, his jaw tight. "One car. Me and Marco. We do not stop." "Fine." The black armored sedan cut through the city, a bubble of sterile security. But Elena did not want to see the clean, wealthy upper districts. "Turn here," she ordered. "Miss, that is not—" "Turn." The driver, Marco, glanced at Sal in the rearview mirror. Sal gave a short, reluctant nod. The car turned, heading south, into the industrial quadrant, into her old life. The pristine sedan looked alien as it passed the warehouses and the factories. "Here," she said, her voice soft. "Stop here." They were at 5th and Union. "Elena, this is not a good idea," Sal said, his hand moving inside his jacket. 10 seconds, Sal. That is all I ask." She opened the door before he could protest and stepped out onto the damp sidewalk. It was all still there. The smell of diesel and the tanneries, the noise, the grime, her corner, her beautiful mahogany cart was gone, replaced by a cheap, bright yellow hot dog stand. Across the way, Mrs. Patel was at her newsstand, thinner than Elena remembered, stacking papers. Their eyes met across the street. "Mrs." Patel raised a hand, a small, sad wave. Elena raised her hand to wave back. It happened in the space of a single breath. A black cargo van, its windows painted over, screeched around the corner, its tires smoking. It slammed to a halt directly in front of her. Simultaneously, a rusted sedan blocked the armored car, pinning it against the curb. Sal roared her name. "Elena, get back in!" The side door of the van burst open. 4 men in black ski masks poured out. Sal and Marco were already out of the car, their guns drawn, but the men from the van were faster. They were not aiming to kill. They fired tasers. The high-voltage crackle split the air. Sal and Marco collapsed, their bodies convulsing on the pavement. Elena screamed, turning to run, but a hand clamped over her mouth, a thick arm. brutal and strong, wrapped around her waist. Lifting her off her feet, she kicked and fought, her nails clawing at the man's mask. But it was useless. She was thrown into the darkness of the van. The last thing she saw before the door slammed shut was Mrs. Patel's face, a silent, horrified O of terror. The van's tires squealed, and she was plunged into darkness, the smell of gasoline and sweat filling her lungs. She woke to the smell of rust and the sea. Her head throbbed, a dull, aching pulse. Her hands were tied behind her, the rope biting deep into her wrists. She was in a chair, a single bare bulb hanging far above, illuminating a small circle in a vast, dark warehouse. The Sleeping Beauty wakes. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was in his 50s, wearing an impeccable suit that seemed out of place in the filth. He was smiling, a slick, predatory expression. "You have caused a great deal of trouble." "Fiorella," he said, walking a slow circle around her. "A little flower, and the great Lucien Renzari burns his entire empire down just to watch you bloom. Who are you?" Elena's voice was a dry croak. "What do you want?" "I am the man who is going to fix the Moretti family's problem," he said. He crouched in front of her, his smile widening. "And you are the solution." He pulled out his phone and took a picture of her. Tied and terrified, he typed a message, his thumbs moving quickly. "There," he said. "A message to your king. He has until midnight. He's to surrender his control of the port unions, all of them, if he says no, or if he is foolish enough to call the police." He reached behind him and picked up a heavy, metal tool from a crate, a pair of bolt cutters. "We start sending him pieces of you, a finger an hour. I wonder which one he would miss the most." Elena stared at the tool, her stomach turning to ice. She refused to give him the satisfaction of tears. She just stared at him, her hatred a cold, hard knot in her chest. "Such fire," he mocked. "I hope he appreciates it." Lucien was in his study with Dante, whose arm was in a complex black sling. They were arguing about supply routes when Sal stumbled in. His face was a map of bruises, his lips split. "Boss," the word was a gasp. They took her." The world stopped. The blood drained from Lucien's face, leaving it a waxy, pale mask. "What did you say?" Sal held up his phone. The text message had just arrived. The photo of Elena, tied to a chair. A shadow of a man in front of her. Then the demands. Lucien stared at the image. He saw the faint, dark line of blood on her neck. Dante saw it too. "Lucien," he said, his voice urgent, "it is a trap. It is what I warned you about. They are pulling you to a location of their choosing. We wait. We get the crew. We surround the building." Lucien's head snapped up. His eyes were not human. They were flat, gray, and dead. The boss was gone. The man was gone. Something else was looking out. "Where?" he said, but his voice terrifyingly calm. "Boss, we do not know," Sal said, shaking. Where did they take her, Sal?" Lucien's voice was a whisper, more frightening than any shout. "Fifth and Union," Sal choked out. "The old fish market, Warehouse 4. It has to be. It is the only Moretti-controlled property in that quadrant. Lucien, listen to me," Dante pleaded, grabbing his good arm. "Do not be a fool. You go in there alone, you die. We wait for the crew. 30 minutes. Lucien looked at Dante. "They threatened her," he said. He pulled his arm from Dante's grasp. He was already moving. He pulled his handgun from the desk drawer. He checked the clip. He grabbed a second from the safe, sliding it into an ankle holster. He strapped a combat knife to his forearm, hidden by his suit jacket. "Lucien!" Dante yelled, but he was gone. The black sport utility vehicle did not slow down. It did not stop at the gate of the fish market. It accelerated, engine roaring like a wounded animal, and smashed through the rolling corrugated metal door of Warehouse 4. Metal screamed and tore. 2 men, armed with shotguns, who'd been standing guard, were sent flying like rag dolls before the truck had even skidded to a stop. Lucien was out, using the engine block as cover. The warehouse erupted. Gunfire echoed, deafeningly loud. He moved with a speed that was inhuman. He was not a boss. He was a wraith. He dropped 2 men with precise, double taps to the chest, a third, on a catwalk above, raised a rifle. Lucien fired twice from the hip, shattering the half-light. The man pitched forward, falling to the concrete floor with a wet thud. A bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing the fabric of his jacket, spinning him half around. He did not feel it. He kicked open a side door, finding 2 more men. The exchange was over in 3 seconds, in less than a minute. The vast warehouse was silent, save for the dripping of water and the hiss of the truck's ruined radiator. 6 men were down. "Impressive," a voice called out, laced with mockery. Lucien froze. On a raised platform at the far end of the warehouse, the enforcer stood. He had Elena in front of him. A human shield, a long, glittering knife was pressed to her throat. Elena was crying, her eyes wide, locked on Lucien. "The great Renzari," the enforcer sneered. "A one-man army, all for a cheap flower girl." He pressed the knife harder. A single, bright drop of blood welled up on Elena's skin and rolled down her neck. Lucien's vision went red. "Let her go. Drop your gun," the enforcer ordered, "or she bleeds out right here. I will be the man who killed Renzari's heart, even if I do not get the ports." Lucien's gun was trained on the man's head, but the knife was at her throat. He could not risk the shot. His eyes locked with Elena's. He saw her terror. He saw her love. Slowly. His jaw clenched so hard a nerve jumped. Lucien Renzari bent down and placed his handgun on the greasy concrete floor. "Good boy," the enforcer laughed. "Now kick it away." Lucien kicked the gun. It skittered into the shadows. "It is done. Let her go. Take me instead." "A noble trade," the man mocked. "I think I like it." He shoved Elena. Hard. She stumbled and fell to her knees. The enforcer smiled, raising his own gun, aiming it directly at Lucien's heart. "But I am a greedy man. I think I will just take you both." He fired. The moment the man's hand moved to shove Elena, Lucien was already in motion. He was not diving for cover. He was diving forward. He was pulling the knife from his ankle holster. The bullet, meant for his chest, caught him high in the side, a brutal, tearing impact that stole his breath and sent a wave of white-hot agony through his entire body. He roared. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of pure, primal rage. He was on the enforcer before the man could fire again. The man's gun clattered away. The enforcer was strong, prepared, bringing his own knife up. It was not a fight. It was a butchering. The enforcer thrust his blade, aiming for Lucien's gut. Lucien twisted, letting the blade sink deep into his left forearm, the one he threw up to block. He felt the steel grate against bone. With his right hand, Lucien plunged his own combat knife into the enforcer's chest. Once, twice. The enforcer's eyes went wide with shock. A wet, gurgling sound came from his throat. He looked down at the knife in his chest, then at Lucien. He collapsed. Silence. The warehouse was utterly still. The only sound was Lucien's ragged, gasping breath. He leaned against a rusted support pillar, his hand pressed to the gushing wound in his side. Blood poured from his arm, from his side. He looked at Elena. She was still on the floor, staring at the carnage, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He stumbled toward her, his legs threatening to give out. He knelt, his bloody, clumsy fingers fumbling with the ropes on her wrists. He cut her free. She scrambled to her feet, her hands immediately going to his face, her touch frantic. "Lucien, oh, God, you're bleeding. You're bleeding everywhere." He swayed, and she caught him, holding him up. He looked at her, at the streak of blood on her neck, at the tear tracks on her cheeks, his face, a mask of agony, crumpled. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Elena, I am so sorry I ever brought you into this." She was crying, her tears washing away the grime on his face. She held his jaw, her grip fierce, forcing him to look at her. "You did not," she said, her voice shaking but powerful. "I walked in with my eyes open. I chose this. I chose you." The sound of sirens filled the air. The main doors, or what was left of them, were flooded with lights. Dante and the Renzari crew swarmed the warehouse, followed by an ambulance. They were loading Lucien onto a stretcher. He was pale, his skin gray, his eyes fluttering closed. "I am going with him," Elena said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Sal, his face grim, nodded and pushed her into the back of the ambulance, climbing in after her. She gripped his hand, the one that was not mangled, holding on as if she could anchor his soul to the world. "Stay with me. Lucien, do you hear me? Stay with me." The hospital emergency bay was a circus. The Fed's investigation had lit a fire under the media. Reporters, cameras, and microphones swarmed the ambulance as the doors burst open. Flashes popped, a blinding, painful strobe. "Mr. Renzari, is this a new turf war? Is it true the Morettis were behind the kidnapping?" Lucien, Elena, her face stained with tears and his blood, her simple clothes torn, was caught in the glare. She looked small, terrified, but her grip on his hand never wavered. The news anchors, broadcasting live, had their narrative. To some. Lucien Renzari was a criminal terrorist, a savage bringing open warfare to the streets of Belhurst, but to others, watching the raw, undeniable devotion on the young woman's face, he was something else. He was a dark, complex legend, a criminal hero who would face down an army, bleed out on a warehouse floor, and burn the whole world down just to save the woman he loved. The hospital was not an option. The moment Lucien was stable. While the media circus was still forming outside the emergency bay, Dante and Sal had him moved. He recovered in a place that did not exist on any map. A private clinic, 2 floors beneath a Renzari-owned import-export business, staffed by a doctor who owed Lucien his life. The room was sterile, white, and windowless. The only sounds were the steady beep of a heart monitor and the quiet hiss of an oxygen tank, and the sound of Elena's voice. She never left his side. For the first 72 hours, while he drifted in and out of a morphine-induced haze, she was his anchor. She held his good hand, her thumb tracing small circles on his skin. She bathed his face with a cool cloth. She read to him from worn paperbacks she'd found in the clinic's waiting room. She was the first thing he saw when his eyes finally focused, and the last thing he murmured for when the pain medication pulled him back under. The feds were tearing the city apart. Agent DeRosa, furious at their interference in the public spectacle, had issued a warrant for Lucien's arrest. He was officially a fugitive, recovering in secret while his organization, now under Dante's strained command, tried to hold the line against both the Morettis and the government. But the media narrative, the one Lucien had so feared, had taken a turn he never anticipated. The image of Elena, tear-streaked and blood-stained, clinging to his hand as he was wheeled into the hospital, had become iconic. She was not the gangster's moll. She was the victim, the tragic heroine. On the 5th day, while Lucien was finally sleeping a deep, natural sleep, Elena made a decision. She borrowed a phone from Sal, who now stood guard outside Lucien's door. She made one call. She did not call a high-powered news network. She called a local Belhurst journalist, a woman named Maria Sanchez, known for her relentless, hard-hitting columns on city corruption. Maria met her in a small, secure conference room down the hall. "They say you are his hostage," Maria said, her digital recorder on the table between them. "That you are brainwashed, that you are a victim of Stockholm Syndrome." Elena leaned forward, her eyes clear and cold with a newfound purpose. "I was a victim long before I met Lucien Renzari," she said, her voice steady. "I was a victim of a city that lets families drown in medical debt. I was a victim of a corrupt inspector, a man named Davies, who tried to revoke my permit, my only livelihood, on the whim of a new order." She looked directly at Maria. "I was a victim of the Moretti family, an organization that the city and the feds allowed to fester in the dark. They are the ones who vandalized my cart. They are the ones who put a knife to my throat. They are the ones who kidnapped me in broad daylight while your police were busy writing parking tickets. And Lucien Renzari?" Maria asked softly. "Mr. Renzari." Elena paused, choosing her words. "He was the only person who offered protection when the system offered nothing. Did he break the law? Yes. He operates in a world of violence, but he did it to protect me. He did it because the people who were supposed to protect me, the ones wearing badges and sitting in City Hall, were either too corrupt or too incompetent to do their jobs. He took 6 bullets and a knife wound to the arm to save my life. While the feds were busy trying to build a case against him, where were they when I was tied to a chair? She sat back. You want to talk about criminals? Let us talk about the city councilmen who take bribes from the Morettis. Let us talk about the agencies that let a woman choose between destitution and the protection of a man like Lucien. He's not the disease. Miss Sanchez, he's a symptom. The interview aired that night. It was an explosion. By the next morning, public opinion had not just shifted, it had fractured and reformed. Elena's words were a spark in a tinderbox. The people of Bellhurst, the factory workers, the waitresses, the small business owners, all knew the corruption was real. She had just given it a voice. Protests erupted. They did not gather outside the federal building chanting, "Free Lucien Renzari." They gathered outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "Where were the feds?" and "The Flower Girl's truth," and "Moretti is the disease." Elena Marquez, the quiet girl from 5th and Union, had become a symbol of truth, and Lucien, recovering in his windowless room, watching her defend him on a small television, became exactly what he never wanted to be, a complex, romantic, and dangerous legend. When she walked back into his room, he muted the television. He was pale, the lines of pain still etched around his mouth, but his eyes were clear. He had never looked at her with such raw, terrifying vulnerability. "You have painted a target on your back, Elena," he whispered, his voice rough, "a bigger one than I ever could have." "I told the truth," she said, sitting beside him, taking his hand. "The truth does not stop bullets." He used his good arm to pull a leather satchel from the bedside table. He pushed it toward her. "Dante prepared this. It is everything, a new identity, passports, a bank account with more money than you will ever need, a house in New Zealand. No one, not the feds, not what is left of the Morettis, will ever find you." He was offering her the escape, the clean break, safety. Elena looked at the satchel, the key to a normal life, a safe life, the life she had dreamed of every cold morning on her corner. Then she looked at him, at the man who had seen her, the man who had brought war to her doorstep and then bled for her on a warehouse floor. She did not touch the bag. "I only ever wanted to sell flowers," she said softly, her eyes holding his. "I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to be left alone." She touched his face, her thumb brushing the dark stubble on his jaw. But then I met the man who made me bloom." His breath hitched. He closed his eyes, a single, agonizing tremor running through him. "Elena, I cannot ask you to stay. This life, it will kill you." "Your life will not kill me," she said, her voice fierce. "Living without you might—" She pushed the satchel back. "So, you get better, and we get out of this room, together." They left Bellhurst in the dead of night 2 weeks later. Lucien was still in pain, his arm in a sling, his side tightly bandaged, but he could walk. Dante drove them in an unassuming sedan, spiriting them out of the city under the cover of darkness. Past the federal patrols, past the media vans, past the life they both knew. They drove south for 8 hours, until the smell of the city's smog and tanneries was replaced by the sharp, clean bite of salt and pine. The cottage was not a penthouse. It was a small, weather-beaten house perched on a rocky cliff overlooking the Atlantic, owned under an alias so deep even Dante had not known about it. The paint was peeling, the wooden steps creaked, and the wind howled constantly, rattling the old window panes. It was the most beautiful place Elena had ever seen. For the first time in months, they lived. There were no bodyguards, no federal agents, no rival families. There was only the ocean, the wind, and each other. They lived simply. Elena learned to cook, filling the small kitchen with the smell of fresh bread and seafood stews. Lucien, still healing, would sit at the battered kitchen table, watching her, his presence a quiet, constant warmth. He, in turn, taught her how to build a fire in the ancient stone fireplace, his large hands guiding hers, his touch gentle. They walked barefoot on the cold, damp sand, the tide washing over their ankles. He was still the boss. The coiled power was still there, but the ocean seemed to smooth his jagged edges. He smiled. She had never seen him truly smile before, a slow, unguarded expression that transformed his harsh face. One night, she woke from a nightmare. The warehouse, the knife at her throat, the sound of gunfire. She sat up in bed, gasping, her heart hammering. Lucien was instantly awake, his hand on the gun he kept on the nightstand before his eyes even focused. What? What is it? He saw her, trembling, and the warrior vanished. He pulled her into his arms, his solid, warm chest a wall against the terror. "You are safe," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Siamo al sicuro, you are safe. I am here." She turned in his embrace, her hands framing his face in the moonlight. "I know," she whispered. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the storm, nor the healing, aching kiss after the battle. This was slow. It was tender. It was a kiss of profound, undeniable peace. It was a promise that they had survived. His arms wrapped around her, his hand sliding into her hair, tilting her head back. His lips moved over hers, learning her, worshiping her. He kissed her like she was the only good, clean thing in his world. There was no fear left, not here, not with him. She let his love, his possessive, gentle, all-consuming love, wash over her. He laid her back against the pillows, his body covering hers, a shield and a comfort. He moved slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, reading every flicker of emotion, every breath she took. And in the small, wind-battered cottage, with the sound of the ocean crashing outside, they made love without fear. A slow, emotional reunion that sealed their bond, not in violence, but in absolute, unconditional belonging. A few nights later, they sat on the small porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the moonlight shatter on the dark, restless waves. The air was cold, but he was a furnace beside her. He had been quiet for a long time. "Elena," he said, his voice low. She turned to him. He was not looking at her. He was staring at the ocean. He was holding something in his hand. He turned to her, his expression raw, honest, and stripped of all his armor. He opened his hand. It was not a ring. It was a single, perfect white camellia, plucked from a wild bush that grew by the side of the cottage. "I cannot give you a normal life," he said, his voice rough. "I cannot promise you safety. The feds will not stop. My enemies will not stop. This peace, it is temporary. It is stolen time." He looked at the flower, then at her. "I have no right to ask you, but I am asking. This is all I can promise. Elena." He held out the flower. Me, danger and all. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the moonlight. She looked at the flower, a symbol of her old life, now a promise of a new one. She looked at him, the most dangerous man she had ever known, the only man who had ever made her feel truly safe. She took the flower, her fingers closing over his. "I would rather live in danger with you," she whispered, the tears tracking down her cheeks, "than in safety without you." He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was both a desperate prayer and a fierce, possessive vow. The final scene was simple. It was morning. The sun was bright, the ocean calm. Elena had set up a small, rickety table at the end of the dirt road that led to the cottage. On it were buckets filled with wildflowers she had gathered from the cliffs, sea lavender, wild asters, and bright yellow gorse. She was selling flowers again. A car of smiling locals, tourists from the nearby village, pulled over. Elena laughed, her face bright and open, as she bundled a bouquet. Lucien walked out of the cottage, a mug of coffee in each hand. He wore old jeans and a simple sweater. He leaned against the porch rail, his wounds healing, his face relaxed. He watched her. He watched her bloom. He walked over, handing her a mug, his fingers brushing hers. He did not speak. He just kissed her temple. A simple, possessive, domestic act. She leaned into him for a moment, the scent of coffee and him and the salt air mixing. She was home. From a quarter-mile down the coastal road, a man sat in a dark rental car. He lowered a pair of high-powered binoculars, his expression impassive. He picked up a satellite phone. "They are here," he reported. "Together. She is She is selling flowers." The line was silent for a moment. Then, a woman's voice, smooth and cold, replied from an unknown, faraway place. "Good. Let them have peace, while it lasts." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Elena and Lucienne. We would love to hear your thoughts. Please let us know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. Your feedback means everything to us. If you love stories like this, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for new chapters and brand new adventures every week. What did you think of their ending? Let us know in the comments. We cannot wait to read what you have to say.